Good evening and welcome to the Town of Millis Finance Committee meeting. This is Wednesday, February 26th. I'm Jody Garzon, the chair. And why don't we introduce ourselves?
Jim Borgman.
Craig Schultz.
Sean Power.
Pete Berube.
Doug Riley.
Kathy McInnes.
Katie, too.
Joyce Boyardi.
Tonight, we're going to look at the draft town meeting warrant articles and the fiscal year 21 budget request highlights. Then we're going to talk about the FY21 revenue split policy discussion, and then a few housekeeping items. So why don't we ask Mr. Gazinski to join us?
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
So I did provide to Deirdre the list of articles, at least the draft list of articles that the selectmen are reviewing at this point. I don't, unless the committee has specific questions, I don't intend to get into details of most of them. Most of them are fairly standard articles, and the fine-tuning of many of these articles is still underway. But just to briefly run through the 26 articles that are on the list, and these are, for the most part, in the order that historically they've been placed on the annual town meeting warrant. Starting with Article 1, unpaid bills. I don't believe we have a large number of those, but we're still reviewing and compiling. The item 2, additional wages and expenses in FY20, so basically just the transfers for this current fiscal year. Article 3.
Are we anticipating anything there? Snow and ice,
No, nothing,
yes to snow and ice, I would have been worried. But
no, this is the first time in quite some time that I've been at this point in the year and
Wow.
have not mentioned any overages in
Right.
snow and ice. So we do have those years occasionally.
yeah.
And I'll take them when they come. And I apologize to the kids to not be able to have as many snowball fights and
They'll thank you in June.
Yes.
May.
So Article 3 is the AFSCME contract ratification. Having said that, I will tell you that those negotiations are still ongoing.
And what's that one for?
That's for the DPW union. Should there be a need for any special appropriation involved with the contract negotiations? And again, that's still ongoing, so there's nothing more I can add to that. Article 4 is the FY21 operating budget. So that's probably the single most important article there. And then the next 3 are enterprise funds, the sewer, water, and stormwater enterprise funds. That leads me to Article 8, which is actually a new article. This has to do with the host community agreement, or agreements for the marijuana facilities. So this is the impacts and recommended uses of funds as part of that process. So as part of the budget process, in the budget forms was a form for departments to fill out in relation to requests related to marijuana impacts. So that is where it would be recommended that those funds be addressed separately outside of the general operating budget article.
Would you anticipate that operating kind of like the community preservation funds, where there's a certain amount that goes in every year or whenever during the term of those agreements, and then with amounts to be allocated to certain projects or programs?
Yeah, I would think there'd be a lot of similarities there, except that, the funds would be probably spent on a more regular basis. We wouldn't be building up funds as much. It would be, a lot of those funds would be spent that year. We are required to, under the legislation, to track, where those funds go and be able to make a nexus between the funds and how they're used and the impacts of the marijuana establishments in town. So we're, as part of this, as part of the budget process, as you know, we're gathering requests, and that article would be the vehicle by which those items would be funded. That's the recommendation.
So is there a lag time in terms of fiscal years as to when it's funded and when the funds are allocated, or is
That
it
is-
simultaneous?
That is a great question. Actually, the finance director and I are in discussions with the Department of Revenue
Okay.
as to the proper administration and timing for appropriation of those funds. Not only these funds, but in estimating in using the 3% from the actual sales tax that the
Right.
town is collecting. So I would anticipate I'd have more information for the committee by next week on that. We have a scheduled call tomorrow with the Department of Revenue to have some of those discussions.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just have a question, but a little further back, as far as what happens to the funds that aren't used for the snow.
Any funds not used will basically flow to free cash.
So that it.
Those will be available for free cash in the fall. Just like any other fund, it's rare that we have funds left in that account, but other than the fact that we're allowed to spend that account into the red, they're really applying the same rules that apply to all other funds in the general fund, and that if, say, there's $10,000 left there as of June 30th, that would show up in the free cash, certified free cash in the fall.
So it doesn't stay it can't stay in their budget?
No. No. But, I mean, to be quite straightforward about it, if there are funds left on June 30th, we will probably use those to make sure that our salt and sand sheds are at maximum capacity. And after that, if there's still funds left, they would wind up into the free cash.
Yeah. I'd suggest also, since we had the building inspector come in and hit our reserve fund pretty hard, if we get to the point of internal transfers, he said he'd
It's
be back.
available for
Yeah,
it also available for an internal
We're
transfer.
going to run out of stabilization funds.
okay.
if-
And we should know by the town meeting, unless we have a mid-May snowstorm, we should know by the town meeting as to what funds would be left in that account.
Well, that has happened.
Any other questions on the host community agreement funds? So again, going back to some more standard articles, Article 9, amendments to the personnel plan. Again, we'll have more information forthcoming a little further down the road about what changes would be recommended there. Article 10, we have the standard Board of Health appointing authority article. Article 11 is the annual approval of our revolving funds. Article 12 is the capital items. The capital committee will be meeting again fairly soon, I believe, to make its recommendations, although I believe most of the capital items you'll see in the spring will be the must-fund items, just because of the amount of free cash we have at this point is limited. Article 13, the Community Preservation Fund, again, a standard article. Article 14, Community Preservation Historic Resource Reserve Fund. Article 15, the Board of Assessors are having their FY21 personal property interim year inspections. So those are, they need to do those updates on the interim years. The Article 16 is something that the the Select Board will be discussing. Supplemental real estate billing is, I think the reason for this is we're looking at trying to capture construction that happens mid-year. Right now, the way the law is set, there's a delay from the time that, say, a new building is built until the town can capture those tax revenues. So depending on the timing of a new construction, the way it currently is set up, there's almost like a period where there's no taxes collected on that new construction. This would try to kind of tighten that time period up so it wouldn't be as long of a period. So there'll be more information coming down the line on that over the next few weeks about the impacts of that. I think with all the new construction that's going on in town, I think there was a thought that And a lot of towns do this. It does require a local approval. It's a state law that towns can accept to basically close like a 6-month gap that the town currently has in its taxation of new construction.
Is it like a bylaw change, or?
It's the acceptance of a state law.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
thought we did this years ago, and it was, like, we were only be able to do it once a year, and then we changed it to every 6 months, I thought, years ago.
Well, we're
Every
doing,
quarterly?
we're doing research on that, and if you end up being right in that assumption, then you may see that article disappear, but we're in the process, there's been a lot of turnover in the finance offices
Yeah.
here, so we're doing some research on that.
I'm fairly sure we did, because it's.
And if we
real-
did, and I can tell you the town has not been practicing that, and didn't practice it when I arrived here, so it's something we're looking at. Our new assessor has pointed that out to us, and we've had a number of discussions about it, and we are in the process of doing research, but assuming if we have not done it in the past, we wanted a placeholder there to be able to have the town consider that. I'm sure within the next few weeks, we'll have found out if that is
Yeah.
back there in the archive somewhere.
Go back about 18 years. It wasn't early,
Okay.
but, yeah, but it's
All right.
someplace, yeah. It's not the last 5, but it just sounds so familiar. I know we had the same discussion. Either we talked about doing it and didn't, or we talked about doing it and did, and I seem to recall we did, but.
Right, and we can check to see if if the town already accepted that specific
Yeah.
state law, or whether that was something similar but different. We'll check into that. Article 17, again, this is in working with our new assessor. We're looking at our senior exemptions. We believe that we're not fully utilizing all the exemptions that are allowable under state law, or as far as the maximum amounts. We're going to be reviewing that. It is, I think, the Select Board's opinion and policy development that this item, they want to look at this item to be able to maximize those exemptions, to ease a little bit of the tax burden on the seniors in the community. So we're looking at that to find out the maximum allowed for those exemptions, and the board will be discussing that. The next number of items have to do with capital items through leases. That's 18, 19, and 20. 18 is the school bus lease. 19, previously approved computer lease. 20, previously approved police cruiser lease. 21 and 22 are capital requests, and those are still being looked at by the capital committee. So some of these may be rolled into the capital article, but again, in reviewing this, we just listed them all here. And again, we have not received the actual recommendations of the capital committee yet, so these are all just placeholders at this point. 23 is a standard article, the Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement services. It's usually around $5,000, and the town's able to recoup in the $35,000 to $40,000 range for that work. Article 24 is the unemployment insurance fund.
Yeah, that is 25.
Oh, you do?
Independent
The audit
annual
wasn't
audit is
there.
20.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'm looking at an older version.
We're not doing
So-
an audit.
We are going to do the audit. We'll do the audit.
We don't want to forget that one
We're
again.
very proud of our audits, so
Yeah.
we are going to do the audit.
News.
And so, again, that's a standard article every year for the audit. And then the unemployment insurance fund, again, that's, we can get the finance committee an update on the balance in that fund currently, but we do want to make sure we have enough reserves in there that we're not having to go back during the year for additional funds. The last two are quite standard, the OPEB funding and the stabilization fund. I just want to make two other notes in regards to the article list. The Board of Selectmen did receive a request to review an article. It's not a petition article, having to do with town employees who are also serve in the armed services, about an acceptance of a certain statute that the town hasn't accepted. The board has taken that under advisement, and they'll be looking at that, but that's not currently in this list. They haven't voted to put it on the list at this point.
Excuse me, is that police officers that are over?
That would be any town employee that is serving in the military. The item would provide, it's Mass General Law, Chapter 33, Section 59, which provides for certain salary, seniority, and leave allowances for public employees. There is a cost to that, and so there's something that would have to be reviewed and determined what the impact would be. We're also looking to see what other communities have approved it and what their experience has been. So, just something that's under review at this point. And
Excuse me, so does that mean that currently, they get paid their salary as well as if they're in the armed services?
They do not.
get paid, Or
They
they
do
don't
not.
get paid at all?
They do not. Well, there's certain contract provisions in the police contract that provide some coverage for their annual training, 2 weeks of training. But it's different if they're deployed. If they're actually deployed for 6 months or a year, that's different. That's a leave of absence, basically, from the town. It's obviously allowed because of the nature of the absence, and their position is held for them, and they have certain protections. But this law talks about covering the difference between the salary or the pay they'd receive in the military and the pay they would be receiving in the town, which would generally be higher. So that's the cost implication, is that there would be some cost there if this was accepted. So it's something for consideration. I don't really have much more on that tonight, but I just want to let you know that the board did receive that request. The last item I want to just note, again, it's not on the list, is the town has been looking at, the select board have been reviewing the issues surrounding our sewer capacity in the community, and how many gallons of sewer we're allowed to have permitted with the Charles River Pollution Control District. On paper, we're getting near that cap. So the board is reviewing ways to address that through bylaws. And they're going to be having a discussion about that next Monday, about whether a bylaw is in order that would address homeowners or business owners that have sewer availability in front of their home or their business, and they're not taking advantage of that. The problem with that, and I apologize to those who have watched all the select board meetings that this is very repetitive for, but the problem with that is the DEP requires a certain set aside for permitted sewerage. It's 110 gallons per day per bedroom, which is about double what the actual is. So that locks up a lot of sewer capacity. So if we have, say 300 homes that have permitted to have it, but they don't, that really could provide sewer for like 600 homes. And so that's sort of the catch-22 a little bit that we're in insofar as our sewer capacity. So the board is looking at ways to address that.
It's my understanding that there's been no time frame that's been established once the permit is issued as to when the tie-in happens.
Correct. There's
It's
no
open-ended.
there's no requirement to hook in. And that's the issue. A lot of towns do have requirements, anywhere from 6 months to 5 years.
Right.
For a property owner to hook in, and if they don't, there's penalties for not. And certainly, there are pros and cons to each approach. Obviously, the individual property owner may not want to hook in if they feel their septic system may last a number of years more, but that puts an additional burden on the individuals that are already paying sewer bills and are really carrying the cost for that unused capacity.
Right.
So there's really a lot of sides to that the board is working through, but they have identified it as a major potential problem to future growth in the community.
Yeah.
And are looking at that and ways to address that. So you'll be getting additional information on that over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I would say.
Peter?
Could you just confirm that you're talking about theoretical or permit capacity versus physical capacity?
Right, so we are not that close to physical capacity. we're only using, I would roughly estimate, about 2/3 of our physical capacity. But we're coming right up against 100% of our on-paper permit capacity. And again, this review and consideration for possible bylaws to address this is part of the process to see if we can kind of straighten out that disconnect.
Why would it take a bylaw change versus just a reapply? You apply for an updated permit or a new permit?
What type of permit are you?
The DEP, your permit, your discharge permit.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to get your permit changed with DEP, virtually impossible. I'm not aware of any town that has the ability to count less than the 110 gallons. And that's the issue, is that the Charles River Pollution Control District, under their permit, and they have a permit with the DEP, they're required to count all our permitted hookups per the 110 gallon per bedroom. And we have a cap with them, and we've expressed to them a desire to add additional capacity or gallonage to that cap, and they have clearly indicated to us there is none available. So unless we were able to convince Medway or Franklin to sell us some of their capacity, we are stuck, and as far as we can go with the Charles River Pollution Control District. The only other options for the town would be to have separate sewer systems that actually drain into the ground, because the state is not very supportive of any additional flow going into the Charles River. So for us, we would, and those systems are a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult to site. So that's real, and they have discussed a lot of these issues, and so they're trying to look at it and attack it from several different angles. But from what we've seen so far, one of the most effective ways to open up additional capacity is to have the property owners that currently have access to it actually hook up to it. And that does require town meeting vote, town meeting approval. The select board in their capacity as sewer commissioners don't have the authority to independently require individuals to hook up. That would require a vote of the town meeting.
Joyce?
And the capacity has included the Toll Brothers sewer lines going down. And there are homeowners, I understand, I happen to be on Orchard Street, so I'm well aware of there's a problem with the sewer line as far as flow. But once that is all taken care of, will those people on that street be mandated to hook up? Or they've got the option as well?
Well, as of right now, everyone in the Toll Brothers project will be hooked up. Those who are on the line, or along the line, are currently not required to hook up. They have the option at this point. Now, if a bylaw were approved that would require a hookup within so much time, then they would be required to hook up.
So how does it affect those that are not hooked? I take that back. How does it affect the people who are already hooked up? If those people who choose not to hook up, how does that affect?
It will lessen the burden on those that are already in the system. Burden as far as their bills. Basically, what happens is there's a certain amount of funds required to operate the sewer enterprise system, and if you add more people to that, it really doesn't add a lot more expenses, but what it will do is it'll lighten the burden, the financial burden across the board. So basically, instead of having to increase, make further increases to the charges to the sewer users, we'd be able to stabilize that, probably make the reserve fund in the sewer account healthier, and stabilize the account so that the billing would be more stable and would not be rising as quickly for those using sewer.
And there's a few developments in town that would like to be able to hook up to sewer. Will they be able to do that, and will that make the capacity reached, or?
Those are all good questions. Right now, as I mentioned, the permit capacity, we are basically, with a few of the new projects that are coming on now, that pretty much puts us at the capacity. We have other developers coming forward with other projects
Okay.
that have not filed yet or had any discussions with the board. Those projects may be denied sewer, or may be told until we're able to free up capacity, they may not be able to have access to sewer. That's the concern about any stifling of development in the community. So it's one of the tools that the select board is looking at is the bylaw. But again, I don't have a bylaw to present to you tonight.
Right.
Right.
I believe town council will be coming to the select board's meeting on Monday, and there'll be a discussion about sewer policies and the development of a bylaw for the board's consideration to put on the warrant.
Do they, if they hook up to the water, are they required to do the sewer, and vice versa?
I don't believe there's a requirement currently.
There wasn't.
They can be on water and not sewer, yeah.
I look at Deirdre, yeah.
Has there,
She sees all the bills.
Exactly.
has there been any discussion in terms of if nothing is done, at what point does the limitations on the capacity affect new growth projections?
There hasn't been any kind of empirical study of it, but what I can say is we believe that without any action, that it will, in the fairly near future, will have an impact on at least the types of development that can go in and the location of where those developments could go in, and that it may be a septic-only approach, which obviously changes the dynamics of what types of building happens and where that can happen. It's much more limited.
But if everybody who had the sewer running by their house was mandated to go on it in a reasonable time, basically it would cut the reserve in half, which would free up a ton of space.
It could free up a lot of
Yeah,
capacity, yeah. Well over 100,000 gallons of
Wow.
capacity.
And even out the bills
The
for
bills, yeah.
the ratepayers.
I have a question on the stabilization fund. It's nothing fancy. That's an in and an out, so it's not just taking money out, but it'll allow us to put money in?
Yes.
Okay, just so it goes both
Yes,
ways.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Not that I
basically,
want to put money in, but I like to have that opportunity.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, every year, we want to look at what our budget is and make sure that we're above that 5% target.
Exactly. And I just want to make sure it wasn't just remove money from stabilization.
Right.
Are there any other questions on the draft warrant article list?
One real quick question. What is the deadline for citizen petition?
It was 2 days ago,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
General question on two, on the capital items and the host community agreement fund. Is the select board looking at that list and predetermining and giving us a sub-list? This goes back to last year, I think. Or are we going to have the opportunity to look at all of the items?
Well, you should see all the items, because any department that, all departments have the opportunity to submit a form in regards to that. So you should have most of those in your packets. There may be a couple departments, I don't.
Yeah, I think I saw four.
Yeah, so actually, there's only 4 or 5 departments that have actually submitted it. So that is what we're looking at. I don't believe we're going to be able to fund all the requests, in May. Like I said, we are having discussions with officials at the Department of Revenue. I believe, based on my history and experience with these accounts, that the town meeting will only be able to appropriate funds actually sitting in the town treasury. As far as these types of funds, we cannot project. So, if there's, say, 100,000 in the fund as of, the date of the town meeting, I believe the maximum that could be appropriated at the town meeting would be that amount. We are in the process of getting confirmation of that to make sure we can use those funds as they come in.
That seems to be the spirit of most of their requirements.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
going back to Mr. Berube content about petitioned articles, will the selectmen be opening the warrant for that bylaw?
Yes, they can open. What the select board usually would do is, if there's an article they want to put on, they would just open the warrant at a meeting, include the article, and close the warrant 30 seconds later. That's basically what they do.
There's a petitioned article that's filed with the selectmen, and at the request that if the warrant is opened for any, the select board wants any articles, they wouldn't offer that article in, or is it at their
That's a
discretion?
good question. I believe it's at their discretion, but if we had if an article came in, we would, we would look at that to see the legal aspects of it. But my understanding is that it would be, at that point, it'd be at the discretion of the select board. And it really, until the warrant is posted, the select board has the authority to open the warrant, add articles, or remove articles, and close it again, up until the time it's transmitted to the town clerk and posted. At that point, it's done.
Right. Thank you.
All right. So, yeah, why don't we move on to the budget request highlights?
Well, I don't have a lot of highlights to mention other than what you've probably already seen in the packets, if you've had a chance to go through those. I will talk a little bit about a few of the things that are just either ongoing or part of the discussions. Many of these highlights, or at least some of them, are simply above-level service requests that would be considered if the funding is available, and that's a big if. But I can just kind of go through a few of the items that have come up. I know that and some of these items have come up in prior years as well. They just haven't been able to be funded. The library is looking for a few additional hours of operation each week. I think they have that in their above-level service request form. Same thing with the Council on Aging. They'd like to be able to expand their hours more in line with some of the neighboring communities that are able to offer more of a full week versus closing a little earlier and/or closing on a Friday. So we're trying to look to see if there's a way to expand that. I think I mentioned earlier that the DPW union is still in a negotiation, so that certainly has possible budgetary impacts. I don't think anything dramatic, but it's something just to be aware of, that those negotiations are ongoing. The fire chief, in his budget, I'm sure you'll be meeting with him, is looking at a federal grant program, which would allow him to bring on firefighters, additional firefighters to handle the expected increase in workload due to the additional senior housing in the community. He's looking at up to an additional 4 firefighters. Again, for those that have had a chance to look at the budget documents, the first full year of those, the federal government pays 75%, and then it starts to drop from there, and then after a period of years, the town does take on that. So that impact is eased over a number of years. So from a staffing perspective and things to consider, that's probably one of the larger items that you'll be talking about as you talk with the different department heads. As was mentioned last year, I do believe there's a need for some additional human resource support for the community. I don't know if there'll be any funding for it this year, but the need remains. I think it's something we need to at least keep on the radar and keep that discussion going. The laws do change rapidly, having to do with personnel management. Towns of this size sometimes do struggle having the staffing needed. Most of the towns around us do have some sort of human resource professional that manages at least aspects of the human resource function. Right now here, this work is carried on by a number of different people who are already wearing dozens of hats. So it just creates a higher possibility of gaps in making sure we're meeting all the minimum requirements and all the state laws and mandates that come through on a pretty regular basis. So just something to keep in mind. Again, I'm somewhat doubtful we'll be able to fund that this year, but again, I just want to keep that on folks' radar.
Right now, does the school department have their own HR?
They do not.
People?
They do not.
Okay.
They basically manage it through their business manager, the superintendent, and maybe for some items, people in the finance office here, and it's the same here. I mean, it's basically dealt with through my office, and the finance offices basically handle all aspects of human resource management.
So it's kind of ripe for sharing across those departments?
It is. We've had discussions about it, when funding becomes available to consider. Because if you had one full-time professional that could
Right.
handle across the spectrum, that could be very useful on a number of levels. And we could probably keep two people busy.
Right, we'd be
But one would
talking
be.
like
one-
over 200 employees, right, or close to 200 employees?
Oh, more than that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we feel that between all the union negotiations, through the onboarding, through the recruitment, benefits, disciplinary issues, keeping up with mandates, there's certain things we have to issue every year to all the employees. They have to sign off of them. There's certain things that have to be kept up with. And it is a struggle to keep up with all of that in the midst of all the other requirements. So I think it will certainly be very useful to have that.
Right, and all it takes is one lawsuit to,
Exactly.
to use up whatever funds you would have used for a couple of years of a position.
Yes. So it's something that I think we should be looking at, and kept on the radar. And again, these are things you're already aware of, but just to note, obviously, this would be the first full year of a part-time IT administrator, 2 new police officers. So obviously, those are things that we're looking at and are managing and budgeting for this coming fiscal year. Obviously, as we already mentioned, from a revenue standpoint, we are starting to get the new growth from the Toll Brothers, but again, there is a little bit of a delay before we actually get those funds, so that just has to be kept in mind.
Unless Craig says it was done
yeah.
18 years ago.
Then we can shorten that by 6 months.
Yeah.
I remember voting on it. Mark might remember, too.
Well, if you find something tomorrow, please send it over to me. I'd appreciate it.
I'm not looking. I'm just telling you, I think we did it.
I'll owe you a cup of coffee if you can provide that for me. I'll tell you that. So again, on the revenue side, talking about the marijuana funds, again, the 3% sales tax, and the 3% host community agreement. We're doing research on the timing and our ability to use those funds. Obviously, we'd like the ability to use those funds sooner rather than later. But there are rules and regulations that the state has, and we have to review that and see how we can utilize that. And I did just pass out this evening the Tri-County budget. I was supposed to go to that breakfast, but I was sick that day.
That
And,
explains it.
yeah, they did mail that to me. I did receive that late last week. And the increase is significant. It's about $240,000. So that comes off, the available revenues. So that is a hit. And it's something that's really, in large part beyond our control. It's an assessment. So just something to be aware of at this point, and that'll be part of the discussion. And that's, I think, those are the big items that I would mention.
And I just plugged that $240,000 in, because as we get more information, the numbers become more solid. It's still 4%, but there's not much money left over after that. We can't take a lot more hits. If new revenue comes in, that would be helpful, but it doesn't drop us below the 4% level that we talked about. But, if we get additional revenue, that will help any of the host community agreement or the marijuana money, or any additional funding sources that come in. And if we have a typical or slightly better than typical benefits line, we're still at the 4% level.
And our
Yeah.
assessment with Tri-County as a town is dependent on the number of students that are
Yes.
going there, but from the previous year?
Yes, and we've had, this is the second year where it's been a pretty big hit.
Right.
So it's gone up from, I think it was like 700 to 900 to
Yeah.
1.1. So, again, it is a trend. It is happening in a lot of areas where students are going to certain types of voc tech schools. There certainly is a need for people who know how to work with their hands and get their hands dirty in the trades. But it does have financial impacts, ripple effects for the rest of the budget.
Madam
Joyce?
Chair, you've got someone out there. But he's
Yeah.
trying to-
You gotta come to a mic, though.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mark Conroy, Chair of the School Committee. I just wanted to add, so the Tri-County is based on students from the previous year, but another piece of Tri-County is they, as a committee, their school committee, can approve a budget at any growth rate they want. They are not subject to Prop 2.5. They are not. So in addition to an increase in students, they can raise the cost per student by 5%, 8%. They can do whatever they want to do. So, you know, there's two pieces to why those numbers can jump pretty considerably.
But you would think, Madam Chair, that the town representatives would want to keep it low because it's affecting their town budgets as well.
And you would think.
Just think, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
You would
Nice
think.
breakfast, Kathy.
because well, the kids make it, you
Yeah.
should go there at lunch, it's phenomenal.
It is.
But
But yeah, they don't hold themselves.
didn't I just see like a 3.75
3.57,
growth?
yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
I think the point to remember also on that is
Yeah.
that not all the towns are going up at equal rates. I mean, if you look at that, some towns, actually, their assessment's actually dropping
Right.
because of the students coming out. So in any single year, there might only be a third of the towns that are taking a solid hit, and the other two-thirds, it's either about level, or it's not that much, or it might even drop. So, and I've dealt with these issues before, where I've worked in the Blackstone Valley Regional Voc Tech, and they have a very good school there. And there was the same type of strain on some of those communities.
You see, we'll be down shortly.
On some of those communities that, you know, where we were only able to increase, say, the local school budget by 2%, and we had to increase the regional voc tech by 8 or 10%. And it's frustrating, but that's just the way the state sets up the system. And it's very limited what we can do here, other than just have, conversations with the administration and the leadership over at the regional schools on trying to mitigate some of those hits. But it's the system we're working under right now, so.
Does anyone know who our rep is?
I believe it is Jane Harden was just
Oh,
voted
okay.
Okay,
to fill that seat.
okay.
So we're happy to have her on board.
Yes,
She'll do a great job.
all right.
And Madam
Because-
Chair, just before
Yes.
I relinquish my seat up here, I know your next item is the revenue split policy discussion. Again, for those that have watched the Select Board's meeting on Monday,
Late
may already
11
know this.
PM.
But the Select Board have decided that their position is, at this point, that they are ready to just proceed with a 65-35 split for FY '21. Having said that, they wanted to express to the Finance Committee that they were still very interested in having a dialogue again, starting over the summer, about the formulaic approach and how this is done moving forward. But based on their discussion, I think they believe at this point that they don't want any radical change in a short time frame that's going to disrupt, the process of this budget season. So they understand that the Finance Committee is going to still review the issue and come up with its approach on it, but they wanted me to just represent them here tonight to express that to the
Yeah,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'm a little disturbed that they're not here representing themselves on it.
Correct.
Because it's our policy. They can submit whatever budget they want. If it's over 4% and they're not here representing why it's over 4%, I believe it's our responsibility to cut it to 4%.
to make
And
a
I know-
recommendation, yes.
Yeah. Because that's what we voted, and they know what we voted. So if they come in over a 4% growth, we will take it upon ourselves to start cutting it to 4% growth, based on a recommendation.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Yes.
May I ask that we have the chairman of the school committee here? I think we were under the impression that the school committee was on board with the 4%. Can we hear one way or the other about that? Thank you,
And-
Madam Chair.
And thank you for being here.
That's fine.
And we know you're just the messenger, Mike,
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
so,
yeah.
The public servant.
you know,
There you go.
We know your
someone's got to
boss
do it. Just think of the pension, like I did.
Yes.
Yes, so the reason I'm here for this, so both personally and on behalf of the committee, we strongly support the plan that you guys approved and recommended. But 4% growth rate is, in my opinion, a reasonable number. It's Prop 2.5 plus some growth, and if you look at revenue over the last number of years, that's pretty much what level service, level staff, if we had 4%, that pretty much got us there. It's not really, actually, we looked at it at school committee last night. Our requests over the last 7 years, usually our level service request comes in at about 4.5%. We usually get somewhere between 3.5 and 4. That's just, and we live within that. The piece of this puzzle too that I think is important as you guys look at it, as we look at it as a town, is the element of, especially over the last 3 to 5 years, we've all collectively talked about the fact that for the prior 20 to 30 years, the amount of infrastructure and capital that was ignored. And so we've sat here for the last 5 years and built 3 or 4 new buildings.
Here, Mark.
And, you know, to now be in an opportunity where we can do something that maintains reasonable growth, puts money towards capital, and even in here, there's room for a discussion of, for example, the HR person. My personal opinion, that should be the number one thing that's added to this town when there's money available. A shared HR person, because as Jody said, we're one lawsuit away from, and a lot of it to no fault of anybody who's doing it, everybody's doing, but this is a function that that exists in large part to keep companies out of lawsuits, and
Right, because the law changes every
all the
year.
time.
Yeah, it's hard to keep
So-
up with.
So I read the language that you guys voted, and there's room to have those discussions on an annual basis depending on how much money is available. You know, so I think doing this, and, you know, I go back to, we tried to pass an override in, it was 2010, 2011, we tried to pass an override that, you know, we probably swung for a home run, and if we had gone for a double or a triple, we probably would have done it. But the core principles of that was we needed to solve, to avoid cuts. We tried to do that. But then we were trying to add more to it so that we could get some of the capital stuff out of free cash so that we could invest in that. Then where we went wrong is we tried to then increase it even a little more so we could put money away to then borrow it, spend it later. We now have the opportunity to do that without an override and without increasing taxes, just by using the natural growth that's coming. So it surprises me that there's not more appetite, especially from individuals who have spent the last few years hammering away at capital planning and the need for infrastructure and capital and roads, and for now, a board who's advocated for those to not buy off on this is a little surprising to me. But
It's
from a
surprising
school,
to us as well.
from a school committee perspective, we recognize that this is a very strategic approach that really puts us the town in a very good position for the next 5-10 years or however long we do it. So I would ask,
So Greg isn't here.
On leave.
so I would ask you guys to stay with this plan, recommend your budget based on this plan, and I will tell you that the school committee will support that recommendation according to this plan.
Well, I think that's important to hear, and I certainly appreciate it.
Yeah.
As well, I've expressed to Craig that I appreciate all the work that he's put into looking forward and showing the needs that we can meet by adopting this approach.
Yeah, and I think that personally, I've never believed it's the finance committee's role to micromanage the budget, but it's our role to set guidelines with which the budget's done.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be in a position where I'm comfortable cutting the municipal budget to keep it within line if it comes in significantly higher than what's affordable. But that's what we will have to do. I believe that's what we'll have to do. I don't believe that's our official role. I believe we should look at the budget that comes in and trust that the school committee and the municipal elected officials are doing it the right way. But if we don't have enough money to cover that, or if it's outside of the best plan for the future of the town, then our role shifts.
I mean, to let the 65, and 65-35, and I've always been, especially in the last few years, a very strong proponent of the 65-35 numbers, but my basis for that was simply because it maintained proportional increases. That was it. It maintained a proportional increase. What we're talking about now is identifying proportional increases at a growth rate and then having discussions, and if we hired a police officer, well, then if you did the math, it wouldn't be 65-35 anymore. It would be something different. But the basis would be a conscious decision on what we add. But at a base level, we are allowing for a sustainable proportional growth to the municipal and the school budget. If you allow, and we allow all new money to flow into the operating budgets, we're doing exactly what we did for 15 years, which was it goes all into the budgets. The budgets are all salaries. There's never enough.
And benefits.
Right.
Salaries and benefits.
And you can always hire more. There's always roles to fill. There's
Right.
always positions to fill. And if we don't take this opportunity to not let it all flow to the operating budget, there's going to be no way to do it unless we go for an override.
Well, we're still going to keep the same roads we've got, too,
Right.
which we all thrive.
So this allows us to address those needs that we've all acknowledged got ignored for way too long.
Hold on just a sec.
I'd like to voice just a little bit of kind of tempered dismay, because I think at the last tri-board meeting, we had a discussion about the way ahead on this, which I pushed. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go so that we could keep this initiative, the discussion of it and the deliberation on it on track? So we met 2 weeks ago, a couple hours. We scheduled an out-of-cycle meeting because I personally didn't feel like it was ready, and I wanted to make sure that we discussed all of the things that we discussed at the tri-board and gave dissenting opinions or other opinions consideration, and we looked at it completely. And I fully came here tonight thinking that the school board was going to be here, as they are, along with the select board, so that we could have the discussion and finish the discussion on it and make a decision. They're certainly entitled to their opinion, and I don't just take issue with that. What I take issue of is kind of the departure from what we discussed and agreed, at least in premise, that we were going to come back here tonight and we were going to have the discussion, and maybe it would have turned out the same way.
Right.
But to not have the discussion after that's what we've been working on for 3 weeks or more is where I'm a little dismayed.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, if I may.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just a couple things. I guess the first thing I want to say, I was informed, and again, you can speak with the board members individually if you want later. 2 out of the 3 board members at least, I know, had conflicts come up. They could not be here tonight. I was asked to come here to really speak for them based on their discussion they had Monday evening, and certainly I think that's online if anyone wants to go look at that. That I think their opinion was, based on that discussion, was that, not that they didn't appreciate the work that was done, and that some good analysis was done, but they felt that further discussion was necessary in their mind before something was locked in place for the next 3 or 5 years. And that there was just, they felt it was a bit of a time crunch at this point, and that they didn't necessarily oppose to the cap, the 4% cap. There wasn't really any discussion of an opposition to that. It was more of, they wanted to have further discussions, and they felt that one more year of the 65-35 would be equitable enough for this coming fiscal year. I think when you crunch out the 4%, it comes out pretty close to 65-35.
With the new change in priorities does.
And so it's not like what you're proposing is a big difference from 65-35. It's more the cap. And they did not have an extensive discussion on the cap issue. So I can't sit here and say they're opposed to the cap. I'm just saying that that was their opinion they came up with Wednesday night. They could not be here as a board tonight. And certainly, if you want to convey anything back to them, either through me or through any other representative of the Finance Committee, you're certainly welcome to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Joyce,
and-
did you have something you wanted to say?
No, she
You're good?
doesn't.
As we get more information,
have
I'll plug the
5-second
number in.
delay.
Right at this moment, there really is no significant difference between 65-35 and 4%.
They didn't know
Yeah.
that Monday when
They
they
did not.
set this, so.
And the other piece is, should we get the marijuana money if that's countable, if there's more growth than we anticipated? And this turns into, as Mark said, a $100,000, $200,000 excess. Yeah, then that's where we all believe it goes to a designed project,
Yeah.
not just into operating. And
Right.
that's the difference.
And I would, from a recommendation standpoint, not speaking for the board,
Yeah.
that's how I view it. I don't
Yeah.
think that we should be looking to spend every dollar that comes in on operating expenses.
Yeah.
I think you need to look at developing a plan and what the town feels is an acceptable service level.
Right.
Trying to provide that the best they can, and then looking at where that puts us from a revenue standpoint. And if there's funds available, we should be looking to take care of some of those capital items that have been piling up. And the capital committee has done a great job on
Yeah.
trying to outline those. And the future requirements are somewhat daunting when you look at that. So we do have to plan for that as well. So I don't oppose a cap either, in theory. It's just that the board hasn't taken a
Yeah,
position.
and we're so close to getting it right for the first time in 15 years with the capital committee, with revenue coming in. There's an opportunity here that I just don't want to
Right.
lose.
Correct.
Yeah.
Doug?
So I just had a question for clarification on the tri-county budget piece. Does that gets lumped in with the school together, or is that
It's off the top.
separate?
Off the
It's
top.
it's off
It's
the
off the
top,
top.
separate
Right.
before we go through the, okay.
It's off the top.
That's what I thought.
It's considered an education cost, but it's not a Millis Public School cost.
Right,
So
right.
and it comes off the top as far as the
Craig had that on your,
Right.
yeah.
That's what I was just
And if it
getting
comes down in
clarification.
future years, it'll benefit us all across the top. So as it
Yeah.
changes, we share in the benefit or the hurt.
Yep.
Does it ever come down?
It's
Yeah.
volatile, it's
Yeah.
highly
Yeah, it
volatile.
can't come
Yeah.
down. There are
Yeah.
towns on the list that it's actually dropped, it's gonna
Yeah.
drop next year.
Even 10 students makes a big
Oh,
difference.
10 students well, 10 students is $250,000.
Right.
Just for this
And
year.
we're looking at a 30% increase this year after last year's
Big
like,
jump.
last
Big
year
jump.
was like
Yeah.
40%, right?
Yeah.
They weren't that high, but yeah,
Yeah,
but
it
they
was
were.
20% this year and probably
Yeah.
20-something last year.
But also,
30.
I mean, just the way, over the next few years, the thing that'll happen too is the class sizes are going down, like the number of kids in the total, so the number of kids in sixth grade and.
In Millis or
lowered-
Tri-County?
In
Millis.
Millis.
Yep.
So even if
That's 30%.
20% of the kids went to Tri-County, 20% of 80 is less than 20% of 100. And so that number from Tri-County is going to come down because we'll have less kids, we'll have more kids graduating out than are going in. So it just ebbs and flows as much of with the class size
Classes.
overall.
Yep.
I just want to say one thing, Madam Chair, and I think I commend Mr. Kaczynski for putting a nice light on how it really went down on Monday night. But when I was at my first tri-board meeting, we were almost charged by the selectmen to find a way and to work at meetings, and we were one of the few boards that met every week for 2 or 3 hours And it kills me to commend Craig as much as I have to for the work that I've noticed now that you do,
Yeah.
Craig, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm the one that made you work at it, and Pete did, and also to convince me, because I had such a different view going into that. And for all of a sudden, I think the selectmen feel that, what I sensed from the meeting, and I don't want them to think that, at least for me, and I'm sure everyone here, is that we're taking away their responsibility. They set the budget, is what I heard, and to tell, there was no mention of conflict in meetings on air. It was, tell them we're not going there, we said it, we're keeping it at 65-35, and I don't want them to think that, the FinCom is taking away its thunder, but the FinCom, all you do is budget. And for the selectmen, the budget is
Just one piece.
4 or 5 meetings.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Correct.
And it's tough to be a selectman, and I had the pleasure of being that, to say no to certain people, to say no to the policemen and to the firemen and to the council on aging, that the money just isn't there, when you can do a 65-35, and this year you'll be able to say yes to a lot of people, because there's a nice chunk of change that may be coming in. But I don't want to give the impression, and I know, Madam Chair, you don't either, that we're just trying to take away from what their responsibility is. It's 2 distinct items, but I truly believe that the Finance Committee has more of a hold on the budget in the town and with Mr. Gozinski than the selectmen do.
Well, I think we're trying to fulfill our charge.
And maybe even the school also, Mark, you know, it's like, you know what you have to work with, and that's it. And you too have a large group of people to answer to, and you want to make happy everyone, but,
Well, they're also trying to educate kids as well as put together a budget.
yep.
And we're just focused on the numbers. That's our
I
charge.
got one thing, you know?
Yeah, we're the one thing, and we're just trying to create some order, some planning, looking ahead. You know, this is one of the biggest frustrations that I had coming on to the Finance Committee, was we didn't have a capital plan. We weren't looking ahead 5 years at many things. It was, a lot of things had just kind of been running. But, you know, I'm thankful that now that we have some development, we have some choices. It's not just, we only have $100,000 to allocate. You know, now that we're looking at having some money, we can really make some choices and really plan ahead. And that's what I think is the most important thing here, not to just spend it all while we have it, and then we have cuts that we have to recommend in the future, because no one likes to have to lay off staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are you going to say something, Joyce? All right, go ahead.
I just, this is reminiscent of meetings that we've had before, though, where we're charged to do things, we're asked to do things, and then it's taken away from us because of the Board of Selectmen's position. And I think that we've got to have a little bit more say about the budget, and I think we've been working very diligently. It does trouble me that there isn't at least one representative from the board here to explain, because, I don't know, sometimes I just feel like this group of people hit their heads against the wall. You know, do a lot of work, and then hit their heads against the wall because we're prevented from really doing what we're charged. That's just my take.
Thank you. Well, hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully, as we've discussed, we're not that far off, no matter which way you look at it.
Yeah.
This year,
Just,
yes, go ahead.
sorry, but I think it's an important distinction, though. It would be unfortunate if we did this and we said, well, the numbers are close enough, so you know what, let's just leave it at 65-35. The whole point and where we are with this is, because quite frankly, and whatever the rationale or reasons or whatever, it will always be easier to do this when it'll actually be easier to do it when there is no money than when there is. Because when there is money,
Right.
to what Kathy mentioned, well, then it's, well, but if I took the 5%, here are the things that I can do. There comes a point where if we really want to do this, we have to say, this is the path we're going to take. We're doing it based on principled decisions, and this is the principle we want to go by. And to just say the numbers are close enough, so you know what? We're just going to leave it at 65-35 and pick it up again. You guys have a charge. There are two columns that could be presented in the warrant. There's the town administrator / select board recommendation and the finance committee recommendation. I believe that every year that I've been here, those have ultimately ended up being the same by the time we got to town meeting. But I don't believe there's any rule that says they have to be.
Right.
So we want to do this, the whole idea of this is to do this collaboratively, but I would encourage you as a group to not, just because the numbers get close enough that, you know what, all right, why don't we just put this on hold? If this is the plan that you guys think is the right one, I support it, the school committee supports it. Follow through.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate that. I think so. For now.
Ready to approve a nameplate. We can tell by the fonts who got him winning.
Just in
Yeah.
case you vote no, I'm taking it.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we vote to approve the following bill of $14.69 for supplies and expenses related to a nameplate.
Is there discussion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the payment to WB Mason for $14.69 for a nameplate. Discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I want to mention that it would have been $21 if they'd used Catherine,
Oh,
so, just saying.
but it would have been smaller. People would have had to squint. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Everyone needs to sign.
How should I sign, Kathy, now?
You can sign however you like. You can sign Mickey Mouse. Then we have our meeting minutes from our,
To recommend that we make a motion to approve the minutes as written for last week's meeting, February 20th.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded to approve our minutes from the February 20th meeting. Discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Nice job on the minutes. I'm new here, and they're
Oh, she's
they're spot on.
fantastic.
You know,
She is
of all
fantastic.
Of all the secretaries or
Best
assistants.
I like the record to show that Deirdre is an excellent
Who knows?
secretary for us.
Especially since I'm the clerk.
Yeah.
Any business?
Put that on that, we gotta get.
No, that's.
All right, what do we have on tap for next week? Okay. Okay, so the police and rec will be at our next meeting, which is next Wednesday. All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Move we adjourn.
Thank you.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Quick before it's
Thank
off
you.
camera.